What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so initially I wanted to cover the story of the Molecule Man destroying Thor's hammer, and I do have it uploaded onto my channel, and I might go ahead and release that. I have no earthly clue, but the more I thought about it, the more I figured if we were going to do a video where Thor's hammer gets destroyed, then why not do a video where it gets destroyed in like the most awesome way possible, which is the Godblast. We've never talked about the Godblast before, and it's a really cool concept in the realm of Marvel Comics in the sense that it basically deals with the idea of just how powerful Thor can be in terms of the absolute peak of his abilities for the most part. Now, the cool thing about this is that this actually picks up as a two-part story of sorts in Thor issues 387, actually it's a three-part, Thor issues 387, 388, and 389 from the first volume. Now, the cool thing about this is that Thor initially just kind of wakes up out in the middle of nowhere. He was transporting from Asgard. I believe this came as a fallout with his battle against a villain called Seth, who's one of those weird gods that exists out there. I don't think it's really that important, but in the middle of all this, he wakes up using his hammer to fly back, ends up on a planet called Pangoria. Now, Pangoria is effectively war-torn. I mean, this is a planet where it's like this military regime that's effectively running the show and is led by a guy named Pegasus, who's really one of the cruelest people that I think we've seen in the history of Marvel just by virtue of what he does. But the fact that they're war-torn and the fact that they're warring against one another is actually pretty significant. And the reason why is because once Thor arrives here, starts poking around, is basically rescued after he crash lands and begins to get the lay of the land, where he intends to basically intervene and effectively defeat the bad guys, the entire planet is met by the arrival of Arashima the Judge of the Celestials. Now, the arrival of the Celestials is a pretty big deal. And if you guys are, familiar with this, with Arashim and so on, then bear with me for a second because there's a lot of people who aren't. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we had like Ego the Living Planet, who was deemed a Celestial. My argument is that the Grandmaster will probably be a Celestial. The Marvel Cinematic Universe interpretation of Celestials is radically different than the version of Celestials from the main Marvel Comics. In Marvel Comics, the Celestials are just these beings who are extremely old. And depending on what era of Marvel Comics you're reading, the Celestials' role in the Marvel Universe will basically fluctuate and it'll change. If, for example, we go back to the extremely old stories with like the arrival of the Fourth Host and different things like that, the Celestials are just some of the oldest beings in existence. And somewhere along the line, they basically cast off their corporeal form. They became beings of pure energy, so technologically advanced that they were effectively gods. If you read a little further into Marvel Comics, if you jump forward a couple of decades, like with X-Men, maybe it was New X-Men, Marvel establishes that the Celestials basically were the ones who were responsible for the creation of all space and time and created the multiverse. If you read All New, All Different Marvel, the Celestials were one of two races that existed at the beginning of all things alongside the Aspirants, and their civil war led to the destruction of the first reality, which coalesced into the multiverse and just started dying and repeating over and over again. There have been different interpretations of how the Celestials function within the Marvel Universe because different writers just take different liberties. What we can take away from the various iterations of the Celestials in Marvel Comics is they are this, almost unstoppable force. But the Celestials are sort of experimenters. They are people who travel around and they basically create life on new worlds. For example, on Earth, they created the mutants, deviants, and they created the Eternals, things like that. But the idea is that when the Celestials conduct this experiment, they basically come back every so often in the form of a host. So a host is a term that can be used interchangeably with an arrival, an inspection, something along those lines. If the Celestials show up and they find out the experiment is not progressing like it's supposed to, which is to say that the race they created has basically just stayed primitive, they never technologically evolved or anything like that, the Celestials will basically wipe out all things in existence. And this comes in two forms. With this particular story, the arrival of Arashim the Judge is basically just showing up and simply saying, okay, we have analyzed this planet for the last 50 years. We've looked at how they've evolved, we've looked at what they're probably going to become, and we have deemed them to be unworthy. And that's where you get the thumbs down. It's basically, this race is not fit to exist. We're going to eliminate them in their entirety. And no one can really stop them. I mean, the Celestials are just unstoppable. I mean, they're so incredibly powerful. Now, in this moment and in this conflict where Thor does what he can to sort of stem off Arashim, there's nothing he he can do. I mean, he just doesn't have the power to hold a being of this magnitude off. Well, the various members of this planet try to escape, and Hagus, who's basically kind of a dick, leaves his folks behind. Again, Thor tries to hold off against Arishem, but it's really just sort of a lost cause. Not only that, in the middle of his attack, he's basically met with the arrival of Exitar the Exterminator. Now, this is kind of a big deal because where Arishem the Judge stands at around 2,000 feet tall, Exitar stands at around 20,000 feet tall. And Exitar is basically the one that shows up and eliminates everything. Now, the cool thing about this is it also gives us some insight into how the Celestials function, which is to say what their makeup is, how their energy works, different things like that. And in this scenario, because of the fact that the coming of Exitar means this planet has a ticking clock, which is maybe a minute or two before the entire place comes crashing down, Thor races up to the top of Exitar and manages to punch a hole in his armor and then climb through. But notice this, that's the extent of the damage he does. He punches a hole through his armor. Thor's ability to damage Exitar is equivalent to you trying to destroy your house by walking up and punching a hole in the wall. That's the most you could possibly do. Now, once Thor gets inside, this is when we start to get into the interesting concept of what Celestials are made up of. But remember, we have to take this story for what it's worth, as, you know, in the sense that it's basically self-contained. We cannot treat what we see here as an absolute fact. But within Exitar the Exterminator is just like this amalgamation of all these different energies and all these different organisms and these different monsters. And so it almost seems like Exitar is an ecosystem unto itself. And even within, you know, Exitar itself are like planets, solar systems, things like that. Again, nothing on par with the universe, but it does house its own organisms. There is life living inside of Exitar. And that's why it's kind of cool here, is because in this instance, Thor basically begins to realize how overpowered and outmatched he is against such a force. But it still goes back to the roots of Thor in the sense that he doesn't give up. He never really quits. Now, the whole idea behind this is that Thor finally locates what amounts to the brain of Exitar. And that's when things begin to get a little weird here, is because with the character of Exitar, one of the things that was established when it came to Fantastic Four issue number 400, which I believe was written by Tom DeFalco, was this idea that the concept of Exitar basically being the being that goes through and eliminates life on these different planets has to always exist. There has to always be an Exitar. If this Exitar is destroyed, another will always take its place. So, you know, with Thor going into the mind of Exitar basically and encountering what amounts to this giant humanoid, which is a security guard of sorts, after it's destroyed, Thor destroys the mind of Exitar. But the way in which Thor destroys the mind of Exitar is crazy because this is effectively the Godblast. Now, the way that it's explained to us, the way the Godblast is given to us in this story is that it's not just like Thor hitting something really, really hard. It's basically channeling everything that makes Thor who he is. It's effectively grabbing his life and throwing it into the hammer. Now, the reason why this matters is because one of the big misconceptions with Thor is that he is an Asgardian, and that's where it stops. That's not actually true. Thor is an Asgardian and an Elder God hybrid, which is to say he's from Asgard, which is an extra dimensional plane, but he's also the son of Gaia, who is an Elder God that represents the very existence of Earth, or represents Mother Earth more or less. When it comes to Marvel Comics, you have all manner of gods, religious gods. So like Odin is a religious god, and, you know, Zeus is a religious god, and like Vishnu and Yahweh and things like that, they represent the pantheon of the Sky Fathers. And then you have your respective gods under them. You've got Loki, and you've got Thor, and you've got Sif, and you've got, you know, Balder the Brave under Odin, and then on Zeus you've got like Hercules and different things like that. And then you have other gods who are considered to be elder gods, which are basically just these entities that came into existence at the very beginning of the Earth's formation. Now, a lot of these elder gods were either destroyed in the civil war of the elder gods, or if they didn't, they escaped Earth and took off into other dimensions. So like Sidorak, for example, who gave Juggernaut his powers, more or less, took off to another dimension called the Crimson Dimension. And you've got a lot of those different beings who exist out there. Gaia remained on Earth. And so because of this, Thor is the son of an elder god and the son of an Asgardian. And what it does is it gives him heightened strength and durability beyond what a normal Asgardian is capable of. That's why he's so powerful. But in this instance, and this is kind of a weird thing here, there's also something called the Belt of Strength. Now, the Belt of Strength, and I don't even know how to pronounce this phrase, but the Belt of Strength is actually this artifact that originally appeared in Journey into Mystery number 91 and was created by Jack Kirby and Dick Ayers, I think it was. And the whole idea behind this is that it is a belt that effectively doubles the strength of Thor. The caveat to this is that when Dan Jurgens was writing the Thor stories after the events of Heroes Reborn, which was more or less a soft reboot for the Thor character, in Thor Volume 2, issue number 25 in 2000, the belt was seen for like the last last time when Thor fought Thanos, and then it was gone. The belt hasn't been seen or heard from since. At the time this story is written, however, the belt does exist. The belt is still there. And so in this instance, Thor basically takes the belt and wraps it around Mjolnir, doubling the strength of what it's capable of, and also helping to sort of channel all the energies it'll let off. And then he in turn takes all his energies, his life force, and then channels it directly into the hammer. And when he does, he basically smashes the brain of Exitar. Not only that, because of the massive amount of energy that's let out of this thing, it basically shatters his own hammer. It's an insane amount of energy. What it also does is it gives us a limitation of what it is that Thor's hammer is capable of. The idea of the hammer having so much energy channeled into it that it effectively explodes is something that I don't think we've really seen before. And so again, that's why this is so cool. Now, of course, this basically leads to the idea that the judge of Arishem is still going to go through. The judgment of this planet's destruction is going to happen. And the way in which this takes place is actually kind of cool. When it comes to the Celestials, because they are so powerful, they have something called cosmic awareness. And what cosmic awareness does is it allows an individual that has it or a god that has it to basically know everything that's going around in the universe or going on in the universe at any particular moment, no matter what it is or what's happening, from the smallest thing all the way up to the largest thing. Now, with Celestials having cosmic awareness, and because these judgments are designed to basically purge all life on any one particular planet, if a person were to leave a planet and the Celestials deem that planet to be unworthy of continuing to live, they would eradicate every member of that race, no matter where they are. And that's kind of the cool thing about that. We've seen that on a few occasions when it comes to Marvel Comics. But in this instance, those individuals who are trying to make their escape explicitly play Pegasus ends up getting destroyed by Arishem the Judge. Now, of course, once Thor makes his escape from the interior of Exitar, once Exitar is gone, effectively shut down, this ultimately leads to Arishem intervening, in the sense that Arishem is the one that, goes through and obliterates all things. At the same time, it is this analysis of Thor in terms of why it was that he did what he did. And in this scenario, it makes sense, because if Thor had just destroyed Exitar and he was like, I do it because I want absolute power, then he would have just been obliterated by the Celestials. But the fact that he was doing it because he was trying to preserve life on this planet and didn't really understand what the motivations of the Celestials were, or at the very least, didn't believe that all life on this planet actually needed to die, because he was effectively being a good guy, what ends up happening is they don't eradicate him. Instead, they create this sort of humanoid copy, which is to say somebody that can speak on behalf of the Celestials, since they never actually speak themselves. And what this humanoid construct basically says is, hey, look, man, the Celestials get that you were trying to do a good thing, you were trying to be a good guy, don't intervene again, because if you do, you're gonna die. The first time it's understandable, the second time you're just pissing folks off, and that's not okay. So of course this leads to Thor's hammer being restored, his suit basically being returned to him, and he just goes about his business being a superhero. But it is kind of a cool moment here, because again, this basically just stands as the idea that Thor is exceedingly powerful in terms of what he's capable of. When it's something like the Godblast, if it's powerful enough to destroy what amounts to a Celestial that's more powerful than Galactus, imagine what it would do against Galactus. It's like a planet or something along those lines. It's a level of power that Thor almost never uses, because if he did, it would obliterate whoever it is that he's fighting on whatever planet it is that he's fighting on. So again, that's why things get kind of crazy, is because within Exitar, it's self-contained. It's contained within the Exitar entity. But if you were to use the Godblast on the Incredible Hulk, for example, I would wager the amount of energy let off by that thing would probably obliterate the planet. I mean, it's an insane amount of power. But with that being said, guys, I figured I'd bring you this cool little story where you guys get to see really one of the most powerful maneuvers that Thor uses. Again, we don't see it that often. Kind of wish we did, because it'd be kind of cool to see. But with that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.